I'm Saima Ahmed Christensen, and I'm a professor at Exeter University and director of DigitLab, which is one of the which this seminar is one of our series of seminars. So DigitLab is a UKRI, it's EPSRC funded center in digital economy, and there's 6 centers. Ours is based on digital technologies to understand how we drive innovation to create the next generation of products and services. And within that, we have a number of themes that we look at, from technology test beds to understanding data exchanges, business models, organizational systems and structures, and how transformations impact the individuals and digital innovation. And one of the themes that runs across our center is responsible innovation, which Professor Sarah Hartley is leading, and which this seminar is about. In the next generation of products and services, we expect technologies, or they are already technologies, such as drones, looking at connected products, looking at data sharing, looking at AR and VR. And with these come a series of challenges, which is the remit of the center. We are across 4 universities, University of East Anglia, Royal Holloway, and Oxford Brookes, as well as Exeter, who are the host of the center. And it's a partnership with industry across many sectors, where we focus on looking at digital innovation, growth, understanding the impact and the transformation of both the organization, the people, and what is needed in order to, the skill sets needed in order to create innovation using digital technologies. So the way to engage with us, we have a website, but we can also sign up for a newsletter from the website, where we have a series of seminars, and you could also engage with us through collaborations directly. So if you want to know more, please go on the website and we'll share the link towards the newsletter. So for today's seminar, we'll ask you to use the chat function, please, for all questions. And I'd like to hand over to Professor Sarah Hartley, who will chair the session.
Thanks, Saima. Perfect. So this is our first Responsible Innovation seminar for the DigitLab seminar series. The point of these Responsible Innovation seminars are to give us a bit of space and time to reflect on the ethical and political aspects of digitalization. And so I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Niccolò Tempini for leading this first seminar. Niccolò is a senior lecturer in data studies at the University of Exeter in the Department of Sociology, Philosophy and Anthropology. He's also a Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, where he sits on the Institute's Ethics Advisory Committee. He's an interdisciplinary social scientist interested in questions of information, data, technology, organization, value, and knowledge. And he publishes in a range of disciplinary journals across science and technology studies, information systems, sociology, and philosophy. His research is primarily focused on big data research and digital infrastructures, where he examines knowledge production economies, organization forms, and data management innovations, with a focus on their epistemological, organizational, socioeconomic, and ethical consequences. So Niccolò, if you're happy to share your slides, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Simon, Hugh, for this wonderful invitation. Yes, so let's share the slides. Okay, yes. So you've probably seen the slides there. Yeah, so basically, I'm going to provide a little bit of a presentation of a little project that we have, the University of Exeter, the Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, has run together with partners at the Lovelace Institute and the Alan Turing Institute on how to do ethics reviews for artificial intelligence and data science research. I'm going to provide a little bit of an angle also on, the development of this project, because I understood that that's something there is a bit of interest in how we went about producing this report and developing this project, and obviously then any gaps I'll try to address in a Q&A. there were a couple of big background considerations and stakes to motivate this motivate this project, to make it relevant. And the idea was that basically current institutions and formats for performing the ethical governance through ethics reviews of the research that takes place in a research organization are under pressure. And we have noted a number of cases of ethically problematic research, say, for instance, projects on doing facial recognition with a physiognomic or phrenologic framework, for instance, projects that passed ethical review applications in the universities and yet are then cause uproar and are found to be deficient in terms of the way they approach the ethical risks that the research is bringing about. So one was we felt there's a question around, so what are the new challenges that are emerging in the existing to the existing research ethics model of the research ethics committee or institutional review boards? You might be more or less aware. I'll give a little bit of a tiny introduction to what this looks like in usually in a research organization. The second one was also that, of course, with social media, with in general the widespread diffusion of digital technologies and increasing concentration of power in the hands of a few enormously powerful organizations, there's been a lot of pressure and public interest for private organizations to demonstrate ethical accountability. And of course, I don't need to sell you this because, for instance, everybody knows what ChatGPT is now, and everybody's been thinking and talking about the ethics of ChatGPT and the risks involved in it and how people should go about implementing it in their products, in their services, how OpenAI should or could have gone about releasing such a technology, and so on and so forth. So there is definitely a trend. Also, of course, we can think about all the scandals and in general heat that places such as Facebook, now Meta, have taken over questions of misinformation, election manipulation, and the like over the past few years. Right. So increasing pressure from all angles on organizations that do research and are private organizations to demonstrate that the way in which data science and artificial intelligence products and services are developed, as also an ethical governance angle to it. And we wanted them to provide, we were aware that there is a little bit of a dearth of practical guidance in this space. Okay, so we wanted basically to run a project to answer these kind of questions and to, with the particularly practice-oriented angle, that to help people who want to, who are involved in ethics reviews, or who want to set up an ethics review function in their organization to go about it. We wanted to build from the direct experience that we have, some of us have had in reviewing for the Alan Turing Institute's Research Ethics Committee, formerly an Ethics Advisory Group. And also I've been, for instance, involved in the Information Governance Review Panel, which is the REC for data banks such as SAIL, a very large public infrastructure data bank for Wales. So in September 2020, Carly Kind, the director of the Ada Lovelace Institute, came to visit Exeter, and we had a meeting when we discussed this idea, and from then we took it forward. So we're saying, yes, just to say something about examples, right? And I'll give you an example of a REC in the form of the Alan Turing Institute. It's a nice example because the Alan Turing Institute, being a relatively narrowly focused organization and also a younger organization, has gone about until now with a relatively lighter approach, more a DevOps type of approach to research ethics review, as if we compare it to the more formalized and lengthy processes that usually take place in large universities. For instance, if you are the University of Exeter, you might be familiar with forms that you need to fill in to put in an application for ethics reviews that are very complex, that involve lots of questions that might actually have absolutely nothing to do with the kind of research you do, maybe because, for instance, you might not deal with livestock or live specimens at all, things like that. In the Alan Turing Institute, being an institute that doesn't have wet labs and is involved in data science and artificial intelligence research all of the time, then we could have a process that is a bit lighter, but also a process that was very committed on being fast and agile in that sense. But the point was, of course, a research ethics committee needs to also to have a relationship with what the institution wants to produce and the kind of ethics of research that it wants to embody, right? So in particular, for instance, in the Alan Turing Institute, the mission statement of the institute is to produce, as the National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Research, there is a mission to produce research that is at the highest scientific standards and is also in the service of the public good. And so obviously these are kind of general broad brush principles that the REC needs to find a way to operationalize and to keep standards for. Well, if you know nothing about ethics review process, this is then again a little bit of a format, and more or less they change. The implementations change from university to university, from organization to organization. The composition of these, the membership and the specific roles might change, but more or less the process always resembles the same format, which is obviously there is an applicant, a researcher, somebody who owns the research projects that needs to obviously put in some formal documentation so that there is obviously an audit trail. And these can be preceded by some preliminary conversations to work out some of the questions and issues that of ethics that might pertain to the project, and how to talk about them and how to capture them in the form. But anyway, the process resembles that of a peer review essentially, because the application goes through an officer and chair who basically decide to hand it over to a couple of expert reviewers, 2 or 3 expert reviewers who need to provide a judgment of the suitability of this project and whether the risks that it involves are worth the benefits, and then obviously there is a decision taken by the chair that could be of accepting the project, so the project is cleared and can go ahead, or otherwise can be rejected altogether if it is just shockingly falling short of ethical principles that the committee wants to uphold, or otherwise often when there are questions or clarifications or amendments that can be worked out through a little bit of a back and forth before then the project can be given the green light and can go ahead. And notably, this process is essentially a process that is performed ex ante. Before the research project can start. In fact, actually, universities make it usually clear that you can't do any research involved in your project until you have received the ethical approval. But once the ethical approval has been granted, essentially, there are no further checks or milestones related to ethical governance of the project, such that the researchers need to respect. There is no monitoring of the progress of the project, no monitoring of emerging ethical challenges, and no further application, say, for instance, before publication. It is notable, of course, that this model of the Research Ethics Committee or Institutional Review Board applications comes from the tradition of medical ethics, where it was on the back of scandals in medical ethics, developed in order to make sure that participants in a medical experiment would be safe from harm. And this kind of harm is something that should be discussed before the experiment is started, of course, and once the experiment has been performed and the harms have been assessed, no further harms should be expected in principle. We have a very different situation in the realm of data science and artificial intelligence, where usually applications and research is scalable and goes through a number of downstream implementations and innovations. So that often the problem is not so much with the people who directly or indirectly participate in the research project, but the kind of impacts that it can have on communities and groups that are more or less vulnerable down the line. Now, in the running of the ethics advisory group, we used to get a lot of formal feedback, and we had lots of discussions. As I was saying, if I haven't been clear, I have since early 2019, I have performed as a reviewer for the Alan Turing Institute and ethics advisory group, and now Turing Research Ethics. And so, you know, we have streamlined and modified the application process, and you know, on the back of routine conversations that we would have at the level of the membership of this panel as to how to improve the research ethics governance process. On one hand, of course, there are pressures for an organization to not to create unnecessary constraints and obstacles to research, especially when there are various kinds of time pressures for research to be for research to be completed quickly. You wouldn't want, of course, the ethics reviews to be holding back research from happening for too long. So, of course, there are reasons to create a process that should streamline the procedure where no harm is foreseeable. At the same time, also, there are lots of other open questions, and we started to think back then that we wanted to, if we could, ideally at the Alan Turing Institute, we would have wanted to provide researchers who apply for ethics for the ethical approval to have some kind of guidance resources, some templates. We started to talk, I remember making the point of we should have a library of gold standard applications, of real ones that we receive, and we ask people to then be able to share with other researchers, but also a library maybe of applications that might not be gold standard, that might be problematic, so that people can have a look at what applications look like. And also other kinds of resources, maybe human resources, availability of experts that can be consulted to at the level of the project design, to already think ahead of, you know, about ethical risks that the project might pose. So this is something that we wanted to feed into the development of this project that I'm talking about today. And other questions from direct experience that I was putting down back in 2020 were, and we were coming back to all the time when we were having meetings in our review board as to, you know, how the reviews are going, and, you know, what are the, you know, outstanding challenges, were questions of scope, for instance. Of scope, what I mean of scope of the ethical reviews. For instance, if we believe the methods are poor, we're not selected to be experts on the scientific methods specifically, but we happen to believe that methods are particularly poor, but maybe not particularly concerning ethically. Should that, you know, where is the boundary where we say, well, this is within the remit of the ethics application, and this is not within the remit application of the ethics application? Because the review, the Research Ethics Committee is not actually mandated to check on the quality of the research. That is traditionally has been delegated at the level of the publication in peer review in the peer review format through which academic culture has traditionally made available research outputs. So, you know, if the research is bad, in other words, it will get stopped by peer review in the journals. But also other questions of scope were involved when we have projects that can be complex and change over time. When it came to, for instance, reviewing some of the code that the ATI was producing for the NHS that should go in the COVID app for track and trace. You might remember all that buzz. You know, this project came in as a project with 6 different milestones, of which the details were not known. You know, the latter milestones were not known very much how they would take place until the first milestones would be completed, and there was extreme urgency. So, you know, that was a clear case in which we wanted basically to be able to approve, do a partial approval for some of the milestones, and then ask researchers to resubmit with more detail before moving on to the following milestones. Then, yeah, there are other kinds of questions that are more traditional and more, you know, rooted in the you know, ethics of data science literature, such as, for instance, the questions of consent. You might be very well aware. You know, they come up all the time, for instance, in applications such as facial recognition, where machine learners are trained on widely available and in, you know, public domain level data sets that contain lots of faces of individuals whose provenance is difficult. Then we had questions of timing, right? Is approval ex ante before the project takes place still good enough, or should we have multi-stage? How often then should the ethics review team be updated? Of course, there are costs involved in asking researchers to update and to submit more details, or to reapply for review at a later stage. And so obviously nobody wants to burden unnecessarily research teams, but it is clear that often data science and artificial intelligence research projects morph and you know, their trajectories and horizons change really with time. And then also questions of domain, and in terms of auditing, if you could say, for instance, you know, what are the right experts when these projects are very complex, they're highly interdisciplinary, there isn't just one kind of domain expertise, but various kind of domain experts. How do you assemble the right kind of reviewing team? But also, what is the role then of informal conversations, of having what I mentioned, a human resource facility where researchers can go and have a talk to an ethical expert to get things right early on, for instance? And how should that kind of informal review culture interact and be related to the formal review process? On the one hand, you wouldn't want basically researchers to waste time and make mistakes at the level of the application, if actually ethical risks can be avoided and worked about and thought about earlier on, maybe with the help of a tutor, a quote unquote tutor. At the same time, you don't want basically the referee to also be a player in a game, right? And so there is something to be said about keeping the research ethics committee independent from the research project, to have no clear conflict of interest, and to make it sure that basically what it means to be ethically approved is standardized and is something valuable. So you need to have basically a notable process that is trustworthy. And obviously also bigger questions, right? Anyway, with the lots of research, data science and AI that has obviously enormous commercial potential in applications. Where do we stop in terms of you know, judging, you know, downstream uses of the technology, and also what should we think about now efforts highly publicized in companies such as Facebook and Google and DeepMind, who set up, you know, ethics review processes and teams, you know, as a way for sure to respond to a lot of the pressure that they're encountering, right, from the public, from the media, who are asking them how, you know, if they're good enough to govern their own research. And you know, the responses, of course, in the back, for instance, of the Facebook scandal over the emotional contagion study, well, they started to think about how to put up the council, they call it, right? The council of independent experts that need to pronounce on research projects and so on and so forth, right? The problem, of course, that lots of commentators raised was corporate processes are much more opaque. They use also slightly different terminology, and there are various questions as to how they sit within those organizations. It's also important for us, it was, for instance, these predated report from the group in data science ethics of Ronald Sandler at Northwestern that was already setting out a little bit of the groundwork in terms of what it means for, especially for private organizations, to try to think about how to set up an ethics committee. And there are various open questions that should be considered in terms of how does the committee relate to the rest of the organization, what kind of power does it have, and what levels of independence does it have, how does it you know, how is it composed, and so on and so forth, and how to shape the process. It must be said that when we talk about public research organizations such as universities, or say, for instance, NHS trusts, there's been research ethics processes, you know, for at least 20-25 years, nearly ubiquitous, and research ethics facilities. And even then, there is no, you know, widely accepted standard. I mean, the implementations of what it means to do ethics reviews vary from institution to institution still, but there is a fairly accepted similarity. In the private sector, it is much more early stages, so it's, you know, variety can be yeah, higher. So we had this project timeline. In September 2020, we started to talk about it, and we moved on to do a scope and literature review of the state of the art. And in particular, we wanted to know, you know, where's the practical guidance? Because of course there is a wealth of research in responsible innovation and especially in data ethics that matters for this kind of work. But we wanted to be closer to what Ronald Sandler was doing, for instance, in that report of the last slide, something that is a bit oriented towards practice, but actually even more oriented than that very report actually was. And we also thought since early on that you know, as a way to basically practice what we preach, we wanted to also publish not only a report to provide this guidance, but also other kinds of resources to provide basically what I had started calling this gold standard a library of applications, or these library applications. We thought, okay, so that there could be a number of resources that we could try to provide as part of our publication for organizations to use in terms of training, for instance, ethics review officers, or also they could be used maybe in the classrooms, or in general, they could have various kinds of uses. And so we started to think about how to put together a little portfolio of case studies, of ethical case studies that are not just ethical case studies as in the way you would read them in the kind of more teaching oriented, but they really look like an ethics application. With the kind of format and template of an ethics application, so that basically people could exercise, you know, ethics review. In May 2021, we ran 2 workshops with the experts from research ethics committees from universities, public organizations, but also private, including members from a few Silicon Valley giants, the likes of I mentioned. Anyway, people who have direct and practical experience in research ethics committees. And we wanted to run one workshop focused on trying to map the key emerging challenges and pressures on research ethics committees. And here I would like to highlight again, it is not so much to highlight just not so much the ethical risks as in pressures on confidentiality or pressures on, and clarity about consent or things like that, but really how these kind of ethical issues that data science and artificial intelligence pose, how do they play out in the context of research ethics processes? That was really for us the definition of the emerging challenge, is the challenge of reviewing. The second one was then, the second workshop was focused on trying to think about ideas and solutions on how to improve ethics review process to keep up with change. So if the model of the REC is under pressure, can it be modified so that it's more fit for purpose? Of what should we do about it? That was the idea. There were also a few follow-up interviews with a few key members as well that were done one-to-one to just further provide further information and input on our work as it developed. And for the remainder of that time, then we developed this report. We also use these draft case studies to stimulate the discussions with the experts. So we really tested them in these workshops, these case studies that I was talking about. We used a couple of them. We gave them to the experts. We asked them to read them and to review them and to then discuss what they look like and what they remind them of the challenges that they encounter in their own research ethics committees. We also had presentations from 3 leading organizations. One was Google DeepMind. What I mean, presentations about of course, the research ethics committee process within DeepMind. One was the University of Exeter through the officer Gail Seymour, and one was SAIL, the Secure Anonymized Information Linkage Data Bank in Swansea, which collects about 95% of the health data about the 95% of the population in Wales. And yes, and then, well, we completed this project in about December 22. We presented it also at ModsFest last month. So the report is aimed at multiple readers, and it is basically a report where we try to provide content that would be valuable both for REC members and officers, also for funders and the wider institutional ecology, journal editors, for researchers and for private organizations. And we provided a little bit of reading guidance, how to read this report in the report so that basically different kind of readers would move differently through it. And then we have, again, these case studies to practice what we preach. And so these would be so that basically you can use them to wear the shoes of the ethics reviewer and have a look at the project, the way they would be put down in an application and decide what are the outstanding issues, decide whether you would approve the project, reject it, or ask for clarifications and amendments, and what kind of clarification and amendments you could use. And I can say I've used these case studies also in my classes, in my modules, and they work well for students too. I should mention that there's a Princeton initiative for AI, and the think tank Data in Society also have got libraries of case studies, though and they had been published before ours, but we thought that those case studies were more oriented towards classroom and towards student, and we thought we wanted to produce case studies that are, again, much more literally formatted for ethics review applications and for the practice of ethics review, as opposed to reading a case study of an ethically problematic data science project, something like that. Okay, so the report makes basically highlights a few outstanding data challenges for the RECs. One is that many RECs lack the resources, expertise, and training to appropriately address the risks that AI and data science pose. They struggle with inadequate resources and training on the variety of issues that AI and data science can raise. The work of the review members is often voluntary and unpaid. We do this as a kind of service to the community. It means also that committees may not have the sufficient time or training to appropriately review an application in its entirety. Studies suggest also that RECs are often viewed by researchers as compliance bodies rather than mechanisms for improving the safety and impact of the research, or as a way to also foster and attract a certain kind of research culture. The second challenge is that traditional research ethics principles are not well suited for AI research, because again, we do research, we do ethics reviews ex ante. The principles are rooted in biomedical human subject research practices, often with a particular kind of concern on the participants who directly participate in the project, rather than wider social groups and wider social impacts. Third challenge is specific principles for AI and data science research are still emerging and are not consistently adopted by ethics committees. We have seen in the literature on data ethics a number of principles that have been put forth to try to capture really the kind of elusive challenges that have been coming up. So it is still unclear how to implement them in terms of ethics reviews and how to operationalize their monitoring. Then there is an issue often with multi-site or public-private partnerships that can exacerbate existing challenges of governance and consistency of decision-making, including also, I should say, for instance, when there are collaborations between institutions that live in completely different countries that have completely different standards of what it means to do ethical research. For instance, universities that could be in very different continents working together. But it also means that when you have public-private partnerships or multi-site studies, it can lead to multiple REC reviews of the same research, and different committees can then again highlight that they work under different standards, and it can lead to lots of complexities when, for instance, there are partial approvals and things like that. Then RECs struggle to review potential harms and impacts that arise throughout AI and data science research, because if it is ex ante, it is very difficult then to be able to do anything when actually there are risks that emerge from the research, but only at the latter stages. Many types of the harms that can arise, such as issues of bias or the kinds of misuse of AI or data, are challenging for a single committee to predict also. And so this is particularly true with the broader societal impacts of AI research, which require a kind of evaluation and review that RECs currently do not undertake for the most part. The last challenge is that corporate RECs lack transparency in relation to their processes. And this is related, of course, to corporate, private sector RECs. They are motivated by a concern to protect intellectual property and trade secrets. But that may, often then RECs in the private sector do not make their processes or decisions publicly accessible. They use strict NDAs to control the involvement of external experts in their decision making, and this also can, in the long run, also erode a little bit of the trust that can be put into their work. So we make a few recommendations that are in particular oriented to a few different actors, right? Understanding that, of course, these challenges that RECs are facing at the moment should be owned and belong to the wider community than actually just the membership of the RECs, the REC and its constituencies. One is that in academic and corporate RECs, we believe that we should incorporate broader social impact statements from researchers. To ask researchers to reflexively engage with the broader social impacts of the research, including the potential environmental impacts of the research, or how there could be dual use, for instance, for people who work on cutting-edge facial recognition algorithms that maybe could be then reused by somebody else for, social discrimination. Or political discrimination. Some conferences, some professional societies in computer science that started to require researchers to submit broad impact statements together with the submission of articles and presentations. So there is experimentation happening in this respect. Other actors in the research ecosystems, such as funders, also can incentivize researchers to engage in these kind of reflexive exercises. For instance, they can request that these kind of statements are incorporated, for instance, in the development of projects that they fund, say. Then RECs should adopt multi-stage review processes for high-risk AI and data science research. For instance, it could be valuable to perform reviews ex ante, but also post the completion of the project. Before publication. Then REC membership should be much more varied. There should be more resources made available to them. RECs could also be, should be remunerated, maybe in terms of workload, for instance, and there should be much more availability to REC officers in the pool of experts that they can ask for a review of a project that has been submitted. Again, because we need different kinds of expertise, including also what ethicists call experiential expertise, the expertise that people have maybe not because they are domain experts, but because they are certain kind of human and people with a certain kind of background belonging to certain kind of social groups. For academic and corporate research institutions, at the level of the institution, it is important that the REC is not the only function, that there are, for instance, there could be something like a training and knowledge sharing hub for researchers and REC members, where there is an effort to create and foster a certain kind of culture of ethical research, where, for instance, there can be a human resource that is made available for mentoring or for helping people to think about or research the ethical aspects of the work that they engage with. So that the researchers can be really the first and most important owners of their own research, but they become so in a dialogical exchange with other members of their organization. In terms of corporate labs, they need to be more transparent about their decision making and to do more to engage with external partners. These also, all this secrecy can also be detrimental in the long run in terms of demonstrating trustworthiness. There is something also that funders, conference organizers, and other actors can do in terms of, for instance, develop standardized principles and guidance for AI. There's been efforts in the literature to create a set of, say, Belmont principles 2.0, ethical principles that the RECs should be trying to monitor and uphold, but there's still a lot of fragmentation. The responsible research culture could be incentivized, for instance, by funders that can create requirements that research conduct a broader social impact statement in order to receive a grant. for instance, or journal editors can encourage researchers to include a broader social impact statement when submitting research. And then finally, and importantly, funding and the material resources for ethical research reviews of AI and data science research should be made available. Quick word about case studies. We have case studies on a number of different types of projects, and not all of these are screaming ethical risk and scandal, because we really thought about also how the level of risk should be variable in this case study. And I'm not going to basically give a spoiler here, but they're not necessarily all scandal type of research project. Some of them might be actually pretty benign, we created them based also on our own research experience. For instance, I worked for a long while on chemical misuse and homebrew chemical substances on the internet. So based on my experience, I created a bit of a research project of the kind that I would like to do, but maybe actually with a few more elements in to dial up the ethical creep and make things a little bit difficult also to spot. Yeah, because really the experience of the day-to-day experience of being a reviewer in these processes is you really never really 100% sure you're catching everything that should be catched. And it can give you a little bit of anxiety, and it can, it's always complicated. And so it really, they are designed to basically allow the person who tries them to sit in the reviewer seat and take some kind of decision. And so we baked into them a mix of risk and dull elements, intentional and inadvertent, that real projects really come with. So the report was compiled by a team from the Ada Lovelace and the case studies, the Institute and Alan Turing Institute and Exeter University. There was some funding for the Ada Lovelace Institute from the HRC around this, and obviously the support and input from directors Richard Everson and Carly Kide was very important. And that's it. Sorry, I'm slightly out of time, and thank you for your questions in advance.
Thank you, Niccolò. That was great. And we do indeed have a few questions in the chat. So I'm happy to read them out for you if you like, or we could read them out together. It's up. I'm not sure whether you can see the.
If you want to read them.
Yeah, so the first one we've got is about the ethical review process, and it refers to something at the beginning, you mentioned at the beginning of the talk. This is, shouldn't the ethical review process be different for the data versus the AI algorithm used? In other words, the process might be different when discussing the data, for example, controlling anonymity by proxy data or generative data models that didn't respect IP, versus the algorithm, in other words, transparency, explainability, etc.
Yeah. I'm not sure why the process should be different, or even why it could be different, because it would be very, very difficult to actually evaluate risks that belong to the algorithms and risks that belong to the data, when often the two things can be a little bit interrelated. And really also, you don't necessarily anyway need different processes. There are, sure, as you mentioned, there are different angles or questions that you might have about the data and different questions that you might have about the algorithm, but is it really necessary that researchers split these into different review processes as opposed to addressing these kind of questions in a one unified package that that talks about the project? It is also really important for reviewers to understand the entirety of the project, to understand really, to be able to have a bit bird's eye view to the project. So I think, the report and what I was talking about, we suggest actually that there is space for multi-stage reviews, but I think that where you're going to break down the review into multiple stages is not for data and algorithm, but it's more about milestones, for instance, as I gave the example when it came to reviewing reviewing project that was developing code for the NHS track and trace app on the COVID. And there were initial code around how to calculate proximity of two mobile devices using Bluetooth handshakes when they are indoor versus outdoors, for instance, and that kind of stuff. And that was work that had to be going in first, and then other work would happen later, also depending on what solutions people would come up with. So that actually makes much more sense then. So definitely it's a yes for multi-stage, but not along the lines of data and algorithm, I wouldn't think.
Okay, thank you. So the second question we've got here is, given that many of the profound leaps in AI applications have often been discovered as a byproduct of innovation rather than as a direct output of the research's original intent, what extent do you believe there's a risk that research ethics committees are asking the wrong questions at the beginning of the ethical review process? Do we need to ask better or evolving questions to mitigate this risk?
Yes, that's, I think hopefully I have already partly addressed this question in a sense that really that we're making a point that there is a need for multi-stage because lots of ethical risks and questions can arise in the unfolding of the project that researchers as well as the reviewers might not have been aware at the inception. And the other thing that we think is really important is also this request that we start to think seriously about broad impact statements at the level of ethical review applications, but also the level of, for instance, funders and journals, where we really ask researchers to really try to stop for a while and think about what are the broad downstream, long-term implications of the work that they're doing. That is not necessarily going to mean that they should stop or not do the work, but it could actually trying to imagine what the work could, the life of your work could be like that 5 years down the line. It could maybe slightly change a few of the things you're doing or how you put out your work, how you publish it, how you share it, slightly, so that just to improve a little bit the odds that things go in a more positive way and the risks are a little bit averted if possible. The gold standard example here is, of course, in this moment is ChatGPT. But I remember when we did the launch of this report, we were chaired by Dame Wendy Hall, and she made the point of the web, right, the World Wide Web, and who would have imagined the ethical risks that will come from the web when Tim Berners-Lee published it, right? And so where these technologies can be enormously impactful when they become platforms for so much innovation that happens on top of them. It's important really not to throw the baby with the bathwater and to just say that simply because you can't predict all of them, then you might as well put your arms up and just go let everything roll. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So this is really about the sort of role of research ethics committees in the broader governance situation, and we only have a minute left. So
yes,
it's really just sort of how can we what's the role of that research ethics committee in these broader governance decisions? I think he was asking here, do we need a moratorium and a public dialogue in advance of some of these applications?
Yes. I'm trying to read the. Yes, I mean that is why definitely there is a need for a work at multiple levels to take place, right, within an institution. But really, institutions need to think about how to better coordinate with others. In the report, we also talk about the potential for institutions to have shared facilities, interinstitutional ethics reviews, for instance, that there could be more coordination, more pooling of resources around this. And then what we need really to think about these things in terms of professional societies, and if not also moratorium, of course. There was just recently I heard an expert talk about, make example comparisons, for instance, with the development of the atomic bomb, and how basically an invention such as a chain reaction and the atomic bomb was then basically through a concerted effort by many institutional actors then tightly controlled, right? That this is a technology that was managed with very tightly controlled at the international level, and did not proliferate further than a few centers because of the very determined intention, right, of stopping the proliferation of these techniques. And it is an excellent example, I think, for all the differences that can be, that something is possible in this sense, that this kind of coordination, even if there are geopolitical rivalries, and Americans like to think that China will get to ChatGPT if we don't do it, and things like that. There are many more options on the table than people are accustomed to think, I would say. Yes.
Thank you. And Giovanni's got a question in the chat, but I don't think we're going to have time for that because we're just a minute past now. So maybe we'll try and address that offline by email, Giovanni. I'm sorry about that. But I just like you all to join me in thanking Dr. Niccolò Tempini for that excellent talk, and for providing the context behind that report, which I think is clearly needed and very timely. So thank you very much, and thank you all for attending and listening, and for the excellent questions. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I put my email in the chat, and yes, thank you.